Welcome to the Sleep Society. One of the most astonishing facts about dinosaurs is that some of them may have lived for more than 100 years, while others grew from tiny hatchlings into animals as long as a bus and as heavy as several elephants. For millions of years, they ruled the land in forms so strange and enormous that even today they can feel almost unreal. Tonight, we will slowly explore the world of dinosaurs, how they lived, how they changed, and what made them some of the most extraordinary creatures in Earth's history. There are many more fascinating facts waiting ahead. So get comfortable, relax, and subscribe if you'd like to join me for more calm journeys through history and the ancient world. For a long time, people imagined dinosaurs as slow, dim-witted giants that wandered through steaming swamps in a world of endless danger. But the more scientists have learned, the stranger and more fascinating the real picture has become. Dinosaurs were not just one kind of creature. They were an enormous and varied group of animals that lived on Earth for roughly 165 million years, changing again and again as continents shifted, climates warmed and cooled, and new environments appeared across the planet. Some were no larger than a chicken, others stretched longer than a basketball court. Some walked on two legs with quick, balanced steps, while others moved on four heavy pillars of bone and muscle. Some were covered in scales, while others likely carried coats of primitive feathers that helped keep them warm or made them more visible to mates and rivals. Far from being simple monsters, dinosaurs were a long-lasting, successful, and surprisingly adaptable branch of life. The story of dinosaurs begins deep in the Triassic period, more than 230 million years ago, when the world looked very different from the one we know now. All the continents were joined together into a vast supercontinent called Pangaea. Instead of the Atlantic Ocean dividing the Americas from Europe and Africa, there was a single enormous landmass ringed by ancient seas and marked by wide deserts, river valleys, and seasonal plains. The climate in many regions was harsh, with long dry periods and sudden floods. Life on land was already recovering from the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history, the Permian extinction, which had wiped out an enormous share of all species. In the wake of that devastation, new groups of animals began to compete for space, food, and survival. Dinosaurs were only one branch among many. At first, they were not dominant at all. The earliest dinosaurs were relatively small compared with the giants that would come later. They lived in a world crowded with other reptilian animals, including crocodile relatives and many strange species that have no modern equivalent. Some of the first known dinosaurs, such as Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus, were lightly built and likely fast-moving. They would not have towered over the landscape in the way many people imagine. Instead, they were part of a competitive and changing ecosystem where agility, speed, and flexibility may have mattered more than sheer size. In those early millions of years, dinosaurs were still one experiment among many, and there was no guarantee they would become the rulers of the land. What made them special was not one single magical advantage, but a collection of traits that helped them survive and diversify over immense stretches of time. Their legs, for example, were positioned more directly beneath their bodies than those of many earlier reptiles. This gave them a more efficient stance for walking and running. Over time, this body plan likely allowed many dinosaurs to move with greater endurance and control. Their hips, limbs, and posture were part of what made them distinct. Even in their earliest forms, dinosaurs were built in ways that opened many evolutionary possibilities. Some lineages would later become massive plant eaters, some would turn into sharp-toothed predators, and one branch, after a very long journey through time, would eventually give rise to birds. That last fact is one of the most exciting truths about dinosaurs. They are not completely gone. Birds are living dinosaurs. This idea can sound surprising at first, especially because people often separate birds from dinosaurs in their minds, as if they belonged to entirely different worlds. But modern science has made the connection clear. Birds did not simply evolve from some vague dinosaur-like ancestor. They are part of the dinosaur family itself, descended from small feathered theropods. That means when a sparrow lands on a fence or a pigeon walks across a city square, we are looking at the surviving branch of a lineage that once included creatures like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus. The age of dinosaurs never fully ended. It changed form. As the Triassic gave way to the Jurassic, dinosaurs began to spread more widely and become more important in ecosystems around the globe. Part of this success may have followed another major extinction event at the end of the Triassic, when many rival groups disappeared. Once again, catastrophe reshaped life on Earth, and dinosaurs were among the groups ready to expand into the empty spaces left behind. Over the millions of years that followed, they diversified into astonishing forms. Long-necked sauropods evolved into some of the largest land animals that have ever existed. Stegosaurs developed plates and spikes. Theropods refined their bodies for hunting, balance, speed, and, in some cases, increasingly bird-like features. Ornithischians, another major dinosaur group, became experts at grazing, chewing, herding, and defending themselves with horns, armor, clubs, or sheer size. One reason dinosaurs capture the imagination so powerfully is that they combined familiarity with strangeness. In some ways, they were clearly animals, with bones, muscles, nests, growth stages, and behaviors shaped by ordinary needs, like hunger, reproduction, territory, and survival. Yet in other ways, they seem almost dreamlike. Imagine standing in a Jurassic landscape and seeing a herd of giant sauropods moving across open ground, their necks rising like living towers above the trees. Imagine the ground trembling beneath their weight, or hearing the calls of creatures unlike anything alive today. Imagine ferns and conifers spreading across the land, insects buzzing in warm air, and predators moving carefully through shadows. It was a real world, not a fantasy, but one so distant from our own that it feels almost mythical. The size of some dinosaurs remains one of the most extraordinary facts in natural history. Animals such as Argentinosaurus and other giant sauropods may have reached lengths of around 30 meters or more, though exact estimates remain debated. However the precise numbers change, the broad truth remains astonishing. Certain dinosaurs grew to sizes no land mammal has ever matched. Their long necks allowed them to feed over wide areas without moving much, saving energy. Their great bulk may have protected adults from most predators. Their bodies, with air-filled spaces in the bones and highly specialized anatomy, were not just oversized reptile bodies. They were complex biological systems that solved the problem of immense size in ways scientists are still studying. To grow that large required efficient feeding, fast growth during youth, and ecosystems rich enough to support such giants. Yet the world of dinosaurs was not only a world of giants. Some of the most important discoveries in recent decades have come from smaller species, especially those preserved with feathers or other delicate traces. These fossils have transformed the old image of dinosaurs as nothing more than oversized lizards. In places such as northeastern China, spectacular fossil beds have revealed feathered dinosaurs in remarkable detail. Some had simple fuzz-like coverings. Others had complex feathers, more like those of birds. These structures may have begun as insulation, display features, or both, long before they became useful for powered flight. This means the visual world of dinosaurs may have been richer and more colorful than earlier generations imagined. There may have been striped hunters, fluffy juveniles, shimmering display feathers, and body coverings suited to heat control, camouflage, or courtship. The idea that dinosaurs cared for their young also adds a quieter, more intimate layer to their story. Fossil nests, eggs, and nesting grounds show that at least some dinosaurs returned to breeding sites, laid clutches of eggs, and may have guarded or incubated them. In some cases, fossils preserve adults positioned over nests in ways that strongly suggest brooding behavior, similar in principle to birds sitting on eggs today. Juvenile fossils also show that many dinosaurs looked different at different stages of life. A hatchling, a young juvenile, and a full-grown adult of the same species might have had very different proportions, behavior, and vulnerabilities. The dinosaur world was not just made of roaring adults. It included nests, courtship, growth, parenting, and the fragile uncertainty of early life. There is also growing evidence that many dinosaurs were more active and dynamic than older stereotypes suggested. Scientists still debate exactly how different groups regulated body temperature, but it is clear that many dinosaurs were not simply sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles in the old-fashioned sense. Bone structure, growth rates, movement patterns, and their evolutionary connection to birds all suggest that at least many species had energetic lifestyles. Some may have had metabolisms somewhere between those of modern reptiles and mammals, while others, particularly bird-like theropods, may have been even more active. A predator chasing prey, a herd migrating across a seasonal landscape, or a parent guarding a nest would all require more than the image of a lazy, half-asleep animal basking in mud. Perhaps that is one reason dinosaurs remain so compelling. They were not failures, mistakes, or evolutionary oddities. They were one of the most successful groups of land animals ever to live. They survived for far longer than humans have existed, adapting through enormous spans of time that included shifting continents, volcanic upheavals, changing seas, and transforming plant life. When we think about dinosaurs, it is easy to focus only on their extinction, as though their story is mainly a tragedy. But that misses the deeper truth. Dinosaurs were winners for an unimaginably long time. Their extinction, dramatic as it was, came only after a reign so vast that human history seems like a flicker by comparison. And still, their end remains one of the most dramatic events in Earth's past. About 66 million years ago, at the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, a massive asteroid struck the region of what is now Mexico. The impact triggered worldwide devastation. Dust and aerosols filled the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked, temperatures dropped, food chains collapsed, and ecosystems were thrown into crisis. Not all life ended, of course. Crocodilians, mammals, turtles, birds, and many other organisms survived. But the non-avian dinosaurs, after tens of millions of years of success, disappeared. It is one of the most famous endings in natural history. And yet even here, there is a strange continuity, because one branch of dinosaurs endured in the skies and trees and shorelines of the post-impact world. Birds carried the lineage forward. So when we begin a journey into the age of dinosaurs, we are not entering a simple tale about monsters from a lost world. We are entering a deep chapter of Earth's history filled with change, adaptation, beauty, violence, patience, and survival. Dinosaurs were hunters and grazers, parents and hatchlings, feathered runners, and towering giants. They lived on a planet that was always shifting beneath them, and for millions upon millions of years, they found ways to thrive. Their fossils are not only relics of death, they are messages from a world so old that it almost feels beyond imagination, and yet close enough to touch whenever we see a bird lift into the air. That is what makes them such a wonderful subject to explore slowly. The dinosaur story is not just about size, teeth, and extinction. It is about time itself, about how life changes, endures, and leaves traces behind. And as we continue, moving deeper into their world, we will see that some of the most surprising facts about dinosaurs are not merely that they were enormous or fearsome, but that they were complicated, successful, and in many ways far more alive, varied, and familiar than people once believed. There is also growing evidence that many dinosaurs were more active and dynamic than older stereotypes suggested. Scientists still debate exactly how different groups regulated body temperature, but it is clear that many dinosaurs were not simply sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles in the old-fashioned sense. Bone structure, growth rates, movement patterns, and their evolutionary connection to birds all suggest that at least many species had energetic lifestyles. Some may have had metabolisms somewhere between those of modern reptiles and mammals, while others, particularly bird-like theropods, may have been even more active. A predator chasing prey, a herd migrating across a seasonal landscape, or a parent guarding a nest would all require more than the image of a lazy, half-asleep animal basking in mud. Perhaps that is one reason dinosaurs remain so compelling. They were not failures, mistakes, or evolutionary oddities. They were one of the most successful groups of land animals ever to live. They survived for far longer than humans have existed, adapting through enormous spans of time that included shifting continents, volcanic upheavals, changing seas, and transforming plant life. When we think about dinosaurs, it is easy to focus only on their extinction, as though their story is mainly a tragedy. But that misses the deeper truth. Dinosaurs were winners for an unimaginably long time. Their extinction, dramatic as it was, came only after a reign so vast that human history seems like a flicker by comparison. And still, their end remains one of the most dramatic events in Earth's past. About 66 million years ago, at the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, a massive asteroid struck the region of what is now Mexico. The impact triggered worldwide devastation. Dust and aerosols filled the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked, temperatures dropped, food chains collapsed, and ecosystems were thrown into crisis. Not all life ended, of course. Crocodilians, mammals, turtles, birds, and many other organisms survived. But the non-avian dinosaurs, after tens of millions of years of success, disappeared. It is one of the most famous endings in natural history. And yet even here, there is a strange continuity because one branch of dinosaurs endured in the skies and trees and shorelines of the post-impact world. Birds carried the lineage forward. So when we begin a journey into the age of dinosaurs, we are not entering a simple tale about monsters from a lost world. We are entering a deep chapter of Earth's history filled with change, adaptation, beauty, violence, patience, and survival. Dinosaurs were hunters and grazers, parents and hatchlings, feathered runners, and towering giants. They lived on a planet that was always shifting beneath them, and for millions upon millions of years, they found ways to thrive. Their fossils are not only relics of death, they are messages from a world so old that it almost feels beyond imagination, and yet close enough to touch whenever we see a bird lift into the air. That is what makes them such a wonderful subject to explore slowly. The dinosaur story is not just about size, teeth, and extinction. It is about time itself, about how life changes, endures, and leaves traces behind. And as we continue, moving deeper into their world, we will see that some of the most surprising facts about dinosaurs are not merely that they were enormous or fearsome, but that they were complicated, successful, and in many ways far more alive, varied, and familiar than people once believed. As the Jurassic world expanded and changed, some dinosaurs began to reach sizes that still seem almost impossible to imagine. Among the most extraordinary were the long-necked sauropods, animals that turned the simple act of feeding into one of the most successful body plans in the history of life on land. These were the giants of giants, creatures with necks that could sweep across wide arcs of vegetation, tails that stretched behind them like counterweights, and bodies supported by immense pillar-like legs. To look at one in a museum is impressive enough, but to imagine a living herd moving across an ancient floodplain is something else entirely. Their footsteps would have carried a deep, heavy rhythm. Their breathing would have been slow and immense, and above the trees, their necks may have risen and curved like moving towers in the sunlight. For a long time, scientists puzzled over how such enormous animals could exist at all. The question was not only how they grew so large, but how their bodies functioned once they reached those sizes. A land animal cannot rely on buoyant water support the way a whale does. Every kilogram must be carried by bones, muscles, joints, and organs under the force of gravity. Yet sauropods managed this challenge with a remarkable combination of anatomical features. Their legs were thick and straight, built more like living columns than like the bent limbs of many smaller animals. Their vertebrae often contained air spaces, which made the neck and trunk lighter than solid bone would have been. Their small heads also helped, because a lightweight skull at the end of a long neck is much easier to support than a massive one. These were not crude giants. They were highly specialized solutions to the problem of scale. One of the most fascinating things about sauropods is that their enormous size may actually have helped them thrive rather than held them back. A giant body could discourage predators, especially once an animal reached adulthood. A long neck meant the dinosaur could feed over a broad area without constantly moving its entire body, which may have saved energy. A huge digestive system could process large quantities of plant material, even if that plant material was not especially nutritious. And by growing quickly from vulnerable, young, to nearly untouchable adults, some sauropods may have survived the dangerous early stages of life with a strategy based on rapid increase in size. In a world filled with predators, It may have been better to become too big to attack as soon as possible. Still, these animals were not invincible. A young sauropod would have lived a very different life from a full-grown one. As a hatchling or juvenile, it was much smaller, much more vulnerable, and far more likely to attract the attention of predators. This means the early years of a giant dinosaur may have been among the most dangerous. Some paleontologists think young sauropods may have grown at astonishing rates, faster than many earlier scientists would have believed possible. Their bones show patterns that suggest rapid growth, and this is one reason some researchers think many dinosaurs, especially the large ones, lived more active and dynamic lives than the old, cold-blooded stereotype allowed. A fast-growing body needs a steady and effective way to process food and fuel development. This hints again at a dinosaur world that was energetic, competitive, and constantly in motion. When people imagine giant sauropods, they often picture familiar names like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, or Apatosaurus. Each of these animals had its own form and feeding style. Brachiosaurus, for example, had longer front limbs than hind limbs, giving its back a sloping profile and allowing the front of the body to stand especially high. This may have helped it browse on higher vegetation than some others. Diplodocus had a more horizontal posture, with a long, whip-like tail and a neck built for sweeping through lower or mid-level plants. These differences matter because they show that even among the giant plant eaters, there was variety. Sauropods were not all copies of the same idea. They occupied different ecological roles and likely fed in somewhat different ways, reducing competition and allowing multiple enormous species to share the same broad environment. The landscapes they lived in were also different from what many people picture. The old image of dinosaurs wandering through endless tropical jungles does not fit every place or time. Many Jurassic and Cretaceous environments included river valleys, conifer forests, fern-covered plains, open woodland, floodplains, and seasonal dry regions. A herd of giant herbivores moving through such terrain would have shaped the land around them. They would have trampled vegetation, opened paths, disturbed riverbanks, and spread nutrients through their waste. In this way, giant dinosaurs may have acted almost like ecological engineers, changing habitats simply by living in them. Modern elephants can transform landscapes, pushing down trees and creating openings. Sauropods, in some settings, may have done this on an even grander scale. Yet the age of giants was never peaceful for long, because where enormous herbivores gathered, predators were never far away. The Jurassic and Cretaceous worlds were home to large theropods, meat-eating dinosaurs whose bodies were built for movement, attack, and sensory awareness. These were not the only dangerous animals of their time, but they are among the most memorable. Theropods walked on two powerful hind legs, balanced their bodies with long tails, and carried heads armed with sharp teeth designed for seizing flesh. Some species were relatively small and agile. Others grew to huge sizes and became the dominant land predators of their ecosystems. They were the hunters of the dinosaur age, though even here the story is more complex than simple images of roaring monsters. A predator such as Allosaurus, one of the most famous large theropods of the Jurassic, likely lived in a world of constant calculation. It had to detect prey, judge distance, manage its energy, and avoid injury. In any age, hunting is dangerous work. A wounded predator may starve, and a kick from a large prey animal can be fatal. This means that the terrifying strength of a carnivorous dinosaur was matched by risk. The giant herbivores they hunted were not passive sacks of meat waiting to be eaten. A tail swing from a large sauropod, a sudden charge from a horned dinosaur in later ages, or the sheer confusion of attacking a herd could turn a hunt into disaster. Fossil evidence showing injuries and healed wounds in predators reminds us that these animals lived hard lives in a physically demanding world. What is especially interesting is that different theropods were probably adapted to different types of prey and hunting behavior. Some may have relied on ambush, others may have used bursts of speed. Some likely scavenged when the opportunity arose, because no effective predator wastes an easy meal. Teeth, skull shape, bite mechanics, limb proportions, and fossil context all provide clues, but the full behavior of extinct animals always remains partly hidden. That uncertainty gives dinosaur science a certain quiet fascination. Each fossil is clear and solid, but the life around it must be reconstructed with care. We do not watch these hunters move through living forests. We infer their world from bone, footprint, tooth mark, and sediment. Among all predatory dinosaurs, few are more famous than Tyrannosaurus rex, though it lived much later than the Jurassic giants and belonged to the late Cretaceous world. It has become almost a symbol of dinosaur power, with its massive skull, enormous bite force, and heavy body balanced over strong hind legs. Yet even Tyrannosaurus is more interesting than its popular image suggests. It was not simply a giant mouth with legs. Its senses may have been highly developed, especially smell. Its bones reveal growth stages from lighter, more slender juveniles to immensely robust adults. Some scientists think young tyrannosaurs may have hunted differently from mature ones, filling different ecological roles as they aged. In that sense, one species may have occupied several niches during its lifetime, reducing competition within its own population. This is a subtle and elegant idea, and it reminds us again that dinosaur life was not static. It changed from youth to adulthood in ways that may have affected the whole ecosystem. The famous tiny arms of Tyrannosaurus have also invited endless jokes, but they were not useless. Though small compared with the rest of the body, they were muscular and ended in strong claws. Their exact function remains debated, but they were likely retained for a reason, whether related to grasping, mating, or assisting in movement from certain positions. This is one of the pleasures of paleontology. The details resist oversimplification. An animal can be iconic and still mysterious. Even the best-known dinosaurs continue to raise questions, and each new fossil has the power to reshape assumptions that once seemed firm. Not all meat-eating dinosaurs were giants, of course. Many smaller theropods were likely quick, alert, and highly active. Some of these are especially important because they help bridge the once wide mental gap between dinosaurs and birds. Small feathered theropods had lightweight skeletons, three-toed limbs, wishbone-like structures, and other features that connect them clearly to avian evolution. In some fossils, feathers form delicate halos around the body. In others, the tail or arms show complex arrangements that may have been used for display, insulation, or gliding. This means the world of predatory dinosaurs was not only filled with massive teeth and heavy footsteps, it also included sleek, feathered animals moving through undergrowth, climbing, leaping, or making quick turns with bird-like precision. The more we imagine these smaller dinosaurs, the more the ancient world begins to feel alive in a different way. The dinosaur age was not just dominated by a few famous giants, separated by empty space. It was crowded with many kinds of animals interacting on every scale. Beneath the towering sauropods and the large hunters were smaller dinosaurs hunting insects, nibbling plants, raiding nests, avoiding larger predators, and living out complicated daily lives. There were tracks crossing wet ground after rain. There were nesting sites along safer slopes. There were juveniles learning to survive, and adults competing for mates or territory. The famous skeletons in museum halls are only the largest landmarks in a much richer living landscape. And in that landscape, time flowed on for millions of years. Species rose and disappeared. Entire groups diversified, spread, and changed. The dinosaurs we often place side by side in books and films did not all live together. Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, for example, were separated by a greater span of time than Tyrannosaurus and modern humans are today. This is one of the most surprising facts for many people because it reveals just how long the age of dinosaurs truly lasted. It was not a single moment or one unified scene. It was an immense era filled with its own layers of history. To speak of the dinosaurs is a bit like speaking of all mammals from the time of the first early primates until the present, as if they belonged to one snapshot. The real story is much broader. That enormous stretch of time allowed dinosaurs to do what successful life always does. They adapted, they experimented, they found new ways to move, feed, defend themselves, and reproduce. Some became giants, some became swift, some grew armor, some developed feathers, and all of this happened not in fantasy, but in the ordinary deep patience of evolution, over spans so long that mountains rose and wore away, while dinosaur lineages continued to change. When we picture them now, it is tempting to freeze them in poses of attack or grandeur, as if they existed only for drama. But their real lives would have been full of slower rhythms as well. A giant herbivore spending hours feeding, a small theropod pausing to listen in the underbrush, a herd moving toward water at dawn, a parent guarding eggs through changing weather. These quieter scenes matter because they bring dinosaurs out of the realm of spectacle and back into the world of living things. They were astonishing, yes, but they were also animals with routines, struggles, and environments that shaped every day of their lives. And that may be the most wonderful thing of all. The dinosaur age was not only dramatic, it was real, textured, and full of small details beneath the grand scale. The more carefully we look, the more we see that their world was not made only of violence and extinction, but of continuity, adaptation, and life unfolding over unimaginable distances of time. One of the most remarkable changes in the way people understand dinosaurs today comes from a discovery that would have sounded almost absurd to earlier generations. Many dinosaurs were feathered. For much of modern history, dinosaurs were pictured as scaly, heavy reptiles, their skin imagined as rough and lizard-like from head to tail. That image was so powerful that it shaped books, films, museum art, and even the instincts of the public imagination. But fossil discoveries over the past few decades have transformed that picture in a quiet but revolutionary way. We now know that feathers were not something that appeared suddenly with birds alone. They were already part of the dinosaur story long before the first true birds took flight. In some lineages, feathers may have begun as simple filaments, soft coverings more like fuzz than modern flight feathers. Over time, in certain species, they became more complex, forming structures used for warmth, display, balance, and eventually flight. This means that the ancient world may have looked much more colorful and much stranger than earlier generations ever guessed. Instead of a landscape filled only with gray-green reptilian bodies, it may have included small hunters with patterned feathers along their arms and tails, juveniles covered in insulating fluff, and dinosaurs whose appearance changed as they grew. Some may have displayed feathers during courtship, much like birds do today. Others may have used them to communicate, intimidate rivals, or attract mates. A feather is not merely decoration. It is a biological tool, and in the age of dinosaurs, it may have served many purposes at once. This adds an entirely new layer to the dinosaur world. It was not just a place of giant bones and sharp teeth, but a world of texture, display, temperature control, and behavior written into the surface of the body. Some of the most important fossils behind this change in understanding were found in extraordinary deposits, where even delicate body coverings were preserved. Under rare conditions, mud, ash, and still water can protect fine details that are usually lost. In such places, paleontologists have uncovered dinosaurs surrounded by the faint outlines of feathers, tails edged with elegant structures, and limbs showing patterns that clearly resemble those of birds. These fossils are among the most beautiful windows into deep time because they preserve not only skeletons, but traces of life's softer details. Bone tells one story, but feathers tell another. They reveal that evolution often works by modifying old features into new ones. The feathers that later helped birds fly may have begun for entirely different reasons in small dinosaurs running across the ground or moving through branches and undergrowth. The connection between dinosaurs and birds is now one of the strongest and most exciting findings in paleontology. Birds are not simply distant cousins of dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, part of the same great family tree. That idea can reshape the way we see the modern world. A crow on a rooftop, a heron by the water, or a pigeon crossing a street is not just a reminder of the past in a poetic sense. It is a surviving branch of the dinosaur lineage, a living descendant of a group that once included creatures of every imaginable shape and size. The age of dinosaurs is still with us in the calls of birds at dawn, in the hollow bones that lighten their bodies, in the feathers that cover them, and in the nesting behaviors they inherited from ancient ancestors. This also changes the emotional feeling of dinosaur history. Dinosaurs are often spoken of as a vanished kingdom, a lost age completely cut off from the present by extinction. In one sense, that is true, because the great non-avian dinosaurs are gone. But in another sense, the dinosaur story did not end. It narrowed. It passed through catastrophe and survived in smaller feathered forms. Birds carried forward the legacy of theropod dinosaurs, and because of that, the divide between ancient and modern life is not as complete as it once seemed. The world outside a window is not empty of dinosaurs. It is full of them. Feathers are only one part of this more intimate picture. Dinosaur eggs and nests reveal another. There was a time when dinosaurs were imagined as almost machine-like creatures, laying eggs and disappearing without care or connection. Yet fossil evidence now suggests that at least some dinosaurs invested heavily in nesting and may have cared for their young. Clutches of eggs have been found arranged in deliberate patterns. Nesting grounds show that some species returned to particular breeding areas, perhaps season after season. In some cases, adult skeletons have even been discovered positioned over nests in ways that suggest brooding behavior, as though they were sheltering their eggs, much like birds do now. This is a moving image when one pauses over it. An animal from a world tens of millions of years distant, sitting quietly over its nest, warming the next generation. These discoveries make the dinosaur world feel less alien and more alive. It was not populated only by solitary giants locked in endless struggle. It also contained parents, nests, hatchlings, and social routines that may have been repeated year after year. A newly hatched dinosaur would have entered a dangerous world full of predators, weather, and competition. The earliest days of life may have been the hardest of all. A hatchling that would one day become enormous began as something fragile, exposed, and uncertain. In that sense, dinosaurs were not only symbols of size and power, they were also creatures of vulnerability, and their success depended on surviving the narrow, dangerous path from youth to adulthood. Some nesting grounds suggest that certain dinosaurs lived or bred in groups, which raises questions about social behavior. Did herds protect their young together? Did adults recognize calls, scents, or movements within a breeding colony? Were there repeated migration routes leading to favored nesting sites? Scientists cannot answer every detail with certainty, but each fossil clue pushes the picture further away from the old view of dinosaurs as simple and isolated beasts. Social behavior leaves only faint traces in the fossil record, yet the traces that do appear are compelling. Footprints moving in parallel, bone beds containing many individuals, and repeated nesting patterns all hint that at least some dinosaurs may have lived in groups, traveled together, or maintained social structures more complex than once believed. The footprints themselves are among the most haunting pieces of evidence from the dinosaur age. A skeleton tells us how an animal was built. A footprint tells us that it was there, moving through a real place at a specific moment. Somewhere long ago, soft ground took the shape of a foot, and under the right conditions, that impression hardened, survived burial, and remained hidden until humans found it millions of years later. Some trackways show a single animal walking calmly. Others reveal groups moving in the same direction, perhaps as a herd. Some preserve the stride of a running dinosaur, the pattern of claws, or the size difference between adults and juveniles traveling together. A footprint is almost like a sentence in the language of movement. It records weight, rhythm, direction, and behavior. In some places, paleontologists have found trackways that suggest herding among large herbivores. Smaller prints appear beside larger ones, raising the possibility that young animals moved with adults. This does not prove every detail of family structure, but it offers a glimpse of life in motion. One can imagine a herd crossing damp ground near a riverbank, the adults surrounding the smaller animals, the entire group moving with steady purpose across an open floodplain. Elsewhere, predatory tracks reveal hunters crossing the same landscapes, their toes digging into the mud, their paths cutting across those of the herbivores they may have followed. These moments were brief when they happened, yet the ground remembered them. Another fascinating part of dinosaur life is the question of sound. Dinosaurs did not leave recordings, and soft tissues that shape the voice are rarely preserved, so no one can know exactly what they sounded like. Yet scientists can still make careful guesses based on skull shape, inner ear structures, close living relatives such as birds and crocodilians, and the anatomy of the throat and nasal passages where evidence exists. The result is a world that may have sounded very different from the roaring dinosaurs of old films. Some may have produced deep resonant calls, low vibrations, bellows, hisses, or booming sounds that carried across long distances. Others may have used short calls, warning signals, mating sounds, or contact calls between adults and young, a herd at dusk, a nesting ground at dawn, or a predator moving through the underbrush, may all have contributed to a rich ancient soundscape. The idea of dinosaur voices matters because sound is part of behavior, and behavior is where extinct animals become most real. A dinosaur that calls to its young, signals to a mate, or warns others of danger is no longer just a fossil skeleton. It becomes part of a living world of communication. The same is true of display structures. Horns, crests, frills, and feathers may not all have existed for combat alone. Many may have played roles in recognition and courtship. A dinosaur's appearance could have carried information visible to others of its kind. The ancient landscape may have been full of signals humans can only partly reconstruct now. Posture, color, movement, sound, and seasonal behavior, all woven together in ways that rarely fossilize clearly. As scientists continue to study dinosaur bones, growth rings within them reveal still more about how these animals lived. Just as trees can record years of growth, bones can preserve evidence of how quickly an animal developed. Some dinosaurs appear to have grown with astonishing speed, reaching huge sizes in surprisingly short spans of time. Others show changes in body form as they matured, meaning juveniles and adults may have looked so different that they once risked being mistaken for separate species. A young dinosaur might have had different proportions, ornaments, or even feeding habits from a mature adult. This reminds us that the dinosaur world was always changing, not only through evolution over millions of years, but within the lifetime of each animal. When all these discoveries are placed together, a fuller picture begins to emerge. Dinosaurs were not merely giant reptiles from a vanished world. They were feathered and scaly, social and solitary, loud and quiet, vulnerable when young, and formidable when grown. They nested, moved in groups, displayed to one another, and adapted over immense spans of time. Their world was not built only from dramatic endings and terrifying encounters. It was built from ordinary days as well, feeding, guarding, migrating, calling, resting, and raising young beneath unfamiliar skies. And perhaps that is what makes them so endlessly fascinating. The more science learns, the less dinosaurs seem like crude legends, and the more they feel like real animals, shaped by the same forces that govern life now. They belonged to ecosystems, to families, to seasons, to landscapes changed by weather and time. Their lives were not simple, and the deeper we look into the evidence, the more we find complexity where earlier generations saw only scale and spectacle. So when we imagine the age of dinosaurs now, it is worth imagining not just the giant skeletons in museum halls, but a softer and more detailed world around them. A nest tucked into ancient ground, a feathered body warming eggs in the cool air of morning, small tracks beside larger ones, calls echoing across a floodplain, a young dinosaur growing quickly in a dangerous world. These quieter images may be among the truest of all, because they remind us that the dinosaur age was not only extraordinary, It was alive. For all their power and success, dinosaurs lived on a planet that never stood still. The ground beneath them shifted over millions of years as continents slowly broke apart and drifted away from one another. Seas advanced and retreated. Mountain ranges rose. Volcanic eruptions reshaped whole regions. Climates warmed, cooled, dried, and changed again. Forests expanded and then gave way to different plants. Rivers altered their courses. Floodplains formed and vanished. And entire habitats that once supported rich communities of life could disappear over long stretches of time. Dinosaurs did not rule a single unchanging world. They survived because they adapted to a planet in motion. At the beginning of their story, during the Triassic, nearly all the land on Earth was joined into the vast supercontinent called Pangaea. This created an enormous connected landscape where animals could spread across huge distances more easily than they could later on when oceans widened between the continents. But Pangaea was not a gentle paradise. In many places, the climate appears to have been extreme, with broad dry interiors, strong seasonal shifts, and difficult conditions. Dinosaurs that lived in this early world had to survive heat, drought, and ecological uncertainty. Their early success may say something important about them. They were not creatures of comfort. They were resilient enough to persist in demanding environments and flexible enough to take advantage of change when it came. As the millions of years passed, Pangaea slowly began to split. This was no sudden break, of course. On a human time scale, nothing would have seemed to happen at all. But over immense geological spans, cracks widened, seas entered new basins, and the land that would one day become Africa, South America, North America, Europe, India, Antarctica, and Australia moved apart. This separation changed everything. Animal populations that once could mix became isolated. Climates shifted as coastlines changed. Rainfall patterns altered. Plants spread differently across the land. And in this new geographical puzzle, dinosaur evolution unfolded in more varied ways. Different regions produced their own lineages, their own ecological experiments, and their own combinations of predator and prey. This helps explain why the dinosaur world was so diverse. There was never one universal dinosaur landscape. A dinosaur living in what is now North America during the late Cretaceous did not inhabit the same kind of world as a dinosaur living in what is now southern Africa much earlier in time. Even when the animals are grouped together in books or museum halls, their actual lives were separated by geography, climate, and millions upon millions of years. Some lived in semi-arid plains crossed by seasonal rivers. Others lived in lush lowlands, coastal swamps, conifer forests, or regions shaped by volcanic activity. Some species adapted to browsing on tall vegetation, while others fed close to the ground. Some hunted in open country, while others may have been better suited to more broken terrain. Earth kept offering new conditions, and dinosaurs kept responding. Plant life was one of the most important forces shaping all of this. Long before flowering plants became widespread, much of the dinosaur world was dominated by conifers, cycads, ginkgos, horsetails, and ferns. These were the green foundations of ancient ecosystems. Giant herbivores depended on them, and predators depended in turn on the herbivores. A change in vegetation could ripple outward through the whole community. During the later part of the dinosaur age, flowering plants began to spread more widely, adding a new layer of ecological complexity. This was not an overnight revolution, but over time, it altered landscapes and likely changed feeding opportunities for many animals. Dinosaurs did not just move through static scenery. They lived in environments where the plant world itself was evolving. That fact can be easy to overlook because many people picture dinosaurs as the main event and everything else as background. But in reality, plants shaped the possibilities of dinosaur life. A long-necked sauropod depended on vast amounts of vegetation. A duck-billed dinosaur with specialized teeth and jaws depended on the plants available in its region. Even small omnivorous or herbivorous dinosaurs would have been sensitive to changes in what grew, when it grew, and how it spread across the land. To understand dinosaurs properly is to imagine not only the animals themselves, but the green worlds they inhabited. Fern prairies after rain, conifer stands near riverbanks, broad floodplains rich with low vegetation, and ancient forests where light filtered through unfamiliar leaves. Weather, too, played a constant role. There is good reason to think that some dinosaur environments experienced seasonal drought, storms, flooding, and fire. Rivers would swell and overflow. Dry basins might crack under heat before filling again with water. Storms could reshape local habitats in days, while long-term climate patterns could transform whole regions over thousands or millions of years. For dinosaurs, survival meant handling not just predators or competition, but the ordinary uncertainty of weather and season. Herds may have moved toward water during dry periods. Nesting may have been timed to favorable conditions. Young animals may have faced especially high danger during bad seasons when food was scarce or shelter was limited. The fossil record cannot capture every struggle, but it strongly suggests that dinosaur life, like life now, was tied closely to environmental rhythms. This is one reason migration or long-distance movement is such an intriguing possibility for some species. Modern large animals often travel to find food, water, breeding grounds, or safer seasonal conditions. Some paleontologists think at least certain dinosaurs may have done the same, especially large herbivores living in regions where resources changed across the year. Trackways, bone beds, and the broad distribution of some fossils support the idea that movement across landscapes was central to many dinosaur lives. A herd on the move would have been one of the most impressive sights of the ancient world. Adults striding steadily forward, juveniles keeping pace, the group crossing mudflats, plains, or shallow water in search of the next place where survival was more favorable. The predators following those herds would also have lived according to the structure of the land. Geography controls ambush, pursuit, visibility, and access. A hunter in dense forest faces different challenges from a hunter in open floodplain. Even the best adapted predator can only work with the terrain available. In that sense, the dinosaur world was a constant negotiation between body and environment. A skull, a leg, a neck, a tail, a set of teeth, or a patch of armor made sense only in relation to real conditions on the ground. Evolution was not designing abstract creatures. It was shaping animals for particular worlds that kept changing. Armor and defense became especially important in several dinosaur lineages, and these features tell us a great deal about the pressures of their environments. Ankylosaurs, for example, carried heavy body armor, and in some cases, powerful tail clubs. Ceratopsians developed horns and broad frills. Stegosaurs carried plates and spikes. These structures probably served multiple functions. They could help in defense, of course, but some may also have been used in display, recognition, or competition within the species. A frill or horn could make an animal more impressive, not only to predators, but to rivals and potential mates. Again, the dinosaur body was never simple. It was shaped by many overlapping demands at once: feeding, defense, movement, temperature, communication, and reproduction. Among the great plant eaters of the late Cretaceous, the duck-billed dinosaurs or hadrosaurs were especially successful. Their skulls and teeth reveal complex chewing systems capable of processing plant material efficiently. Some species also carried elaborate crests on their heads, which may have helped produce sound or provided visual signals. These animals may have lived in herds, and some fossil evidence suggests group living, at least in certain settings. If so, then some dinosaur landscapes may have been filled not only with movement, but with social sound, low calls, warning noises, contact signals between young and adults, and perhaps seasonal displays. A hadrosaur herd moving through a river valley, crest calls echoing through humid air, is a very different image from the old silent reptile world once imagined in popular culture. Even small details of fossilized bone can reveal how deeply dinosaurs were connected to their changing environments. Growth rings may show stress during hard seasons. Wear on teeth can suggest what kind of plants were being eaten. Chemical traces preserved in fossils can sometimes provide clues about ancient water, temperature, or movement across landscapes. This is one of the quiet wonders of paleontology. It is not just about dramatic skeletons. It is also about patient reading of subtle evidence. A bone is not merely a bone. It can be a record of weather, diet, stress, injury, age, and survival. From such evidence, scientists slowly rebuild worlds that vanished tens of millions of years ago. And yet, for all the adaptation dinosaurs achieved, they could never control the planet they lived on. Earth's systems were always larger than any one group of animals. Volcanic episodes could release enormous amounts of gas into the atmosphere. Sea levels could rise and reshape coastlines. Tectonic shifts could split populations and redirect climates. Dinosaurs endured many such changes over their long history, which makes their overall success even more impressive. They were not brief rulers of a stable kingdom. They were survivors of repeated planetary transformation. This is why their final extinction stands out so sharply. Dinosaurs had weathered countless environmental shifts before. They had passed through changes that eliminated many other creatures, but the catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous seems to have come with the speed and scale that pushed many ecosystems beyond their limits. When the asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, the immediate destruction was immense, but the deeper danger came from what followed. Dust, soot, and aerosols entered the atmosphere. Sunlight was reduced. Temperatures changed. Plant productivity collapsed in many places. Food webs that had supported dinosaur life for millions of years began to fail. Even large, well-adapted animals can do little when the foundations of the entire ecosystem are suddenly broken. The tragedy of this ending is easier to understand once we remember how successful dinosaurs had been before it. They were not fading relics waiting to disappear. Right up until the end, many dinosaur groups were thriving, diverse, and deeply woven into the living systems of their time. That makes their extinction feel less like a slow, natural retirement and more like a world interrupted. In place after place, Lineages that had survived for immense stretches of time came to an abrupt halt. The great herds vanished. The giant predators vanished. Whole ways of life vanished. Only the avian branch, the lineage that had already taken to the air in smaller feathered forms, crossed that boundary and continued on. There is something almost humbling in that. Dinosaurs, for all their size and grandeur, were never separate from the larger history of Earth. They were part of it. They rose as continents shifted. They diversified as climates changed. They adapted to ancient forests, plains, and floodplains. And in the end, they were vulnerable to planetary forces far beyond their control. Their story is therefore not just about strange and magnificent animals. It is also about the deep relationship between life and Earth itself, between evolving bodies and restless landscapes. When we picture dinosaurs in this way, their world becomes broader and more realistic. We begin to see them not as isolated monsters placed on a prehistoric stage, but as inhabitants of a complex planet. A sauropod lifting its head above conifers was part of a changing ecosystem. A small feathered predator crossing volcanic ash was part of a climate and geography still unfolding. A herd moving toward water under a dry season sky was part of rhythms older than humanity can easily imagine. Dinosaurs belonged to Earth as fully as any animals ever have, and their history cannot be separated from the world that shaped them. That may be one of the most calming things about studying them. However strange they seem at first, their story is deeply familiar in one important sense. It is the story of life responding to change, adapting where it can, struggling where it must, and leaving behind traces for the future. The details are ancient, but the pattern is timeless. Dinosaurs lived, fed, nested, fought, migrated, and endured beneath changing skies, on continents that would one day become our own. Their age is gone, but the processes that shaped it are still at work now, slowly rearranging the world as they always have. And so the more we learn about dinosaurs, the more they seem not less real, but more deeply connected to everything else in natural history. Their bones are not simply symbols of extinction. They are evidence of long survival on a restless planet, proof that life can become astonishingly varied under the pressure of time. In their footsteps, in their nests, in their teeth and feathers and gigantic skeletons, we see not only a lost world, but a living Earth caught in one of its grandest chapters. One of the most fascinating things about dinosaurs is that the longer scientists study them, the less they resemble the old picture of mindless reptiles wandering through a simple ancient wilderness. Instead, they begin to look like animals with complex bodies, varied behaviors, and different ways of solving the same basic problems of life. How do you find food without wasting too much energy? How do you protect yourself from predators? How do you attract a mate, defend a territory, raise young, and survive changing seasons? Dinosaurs answered these questions in many different ways, and some of their solutions were so effective that they endured for millions upon millions of years. Take the great horned dinosaurs, for example, especially the ceratopsians of the late Cretaceous. These animals are often remembered for their impressive skulls, crowned with horns and extended frills that made them look almost ceremonial, as if nature had sculpted them for maximum grandeur. Triceratops is the most famous among them, with its 3 horns and broad bony shield at the back of the skull, but it was only one member of a wider and more varied family. Some ceratopsians had huge nose horns. Others had long brow horns. Some had elaborate frills edged with spikes or openings. At first glance, these structures seem purely defensive, and they certainly could have helped in protection. A charging herbivore armed with horns would have been a serious danger even to a large predator. But defense was probably only part of the story. In many animals today, striking body structures serve more than one function at once. Horns can be used in combat, but also in display. Colorful feathers can attract mates, signal health, or help individuals recognize members of their own species. The same may have been true for ceratopsians. Their horns and frills may have helped them identify one another at a distance, compete with rivals, or impress potential mates. This means a ceratopsian landscape may have been visually dramatic in a way that fossils only partly convey. Herds of these animals moving across plains or through river valleys may have presented a shifting display of horn shapes, frill outlines, body sizes, and postures. What looks to us like armor may also have been communication. That idea becomes even more intriguing when one imagines how dinosaurs may have seen one another. Humans are used to judging the world through our own senses, but every species lives in a slightly different perceptual world. Some dinosaurs may have been highly attuned to posture and movement. Others may have relied strongly on sound, scent, or visual signals. A frill lifted at a certain angle, a horn displayed in profile, a head movement made during courtship or warning. All of these could have carried meaning. The dinosaur world was likely not silent or expressionless. It was probably rich with signals we can only dimly reconstruct now. The same is true of armored dinosaurs such as the ankylosaurs. These low, heavy plant eaters were among the most strongly defended animals ever to walk on land. Their backs were covered in bony plates and nodules embedded in the skin, forming a shield-like layer over much of the body. Some species had powerful tail clubs, solid masses of bone at the end of stiffened tails that may have been capable of delivering dangerous blows. To picture one of these animals moving slowly through Cretaceous vegetation is to picture a creature that had turned defense into an art form. It was not fast in the way a small theropod was fast, nor towering in the way a sauropod towered. Instead, it survived by becoming difficult, dangerous, and costly to attack. A large predator deciding whether to confront an ankylosaur would have had to make a careful calculation. Even if the predator was strong enough to kill, the risk of injury might have been severe. A damaged leg, cracked bone, or internal injury from a tail strike could end a predator's future hunting ability. In that sense, armor does more than block attack. It changes the decisions of other animals before an attack even begins. The best defense is sometimes not being attacked at all, because predators learn that the effort and danger are not worth the reward. The armored dinosaurs may have relied partly on exactly this principle. Their bodies announced difficulty. Yet even here, the story is not only about danger. An ankylosaur still had to feed, move, rest, and survive daily life. It lived at ground level, where the details of vegetation, terrain, and climate mattered enormously. It would have passed through ferns, low shrubs, and open patches of earth, perhaps pausing often to crop plants close to the ground. Its body was built for steadiness more than speed, for protection more than elegance, but that does not make it primitive. It was exquisitely adapted to its own way of life, every plate and joint reflecting millions of years of selection. Dinosaurs often seem extraordinary because they grew to great sizes or carried bizarre weapons. But the real wonder is how well each type fit its own ecological role. Among the most socially intriguing dinosaurs were the hadrosaurs, often called duck-billed dinosaurs. These animals may not look as dramatic at first glance as a horned ceratopsian or a towering sauropod, yet they were among the most successful herbivores of the late Cretaceous. Their skulls contained remarkable dental batteries, tightly packed arrays of teeth that were replaced continuously and formed grinding surfaces for processing tough plant material. This gave them one of the most sophisticated feeding systems in dinosaur history. To modern eyes, teeth may seem like a small detail, but in evolutionary terms, they can define an entire way of life. Hadrosaurs were not simply large herbivores eating whatever they found. They were specialized feeders capable of handling substantial volumes of vegetation efficiently, and that efficiency may have helped them spread widely and thrive. Some hadrosaurs also carried long or elaborate crests on their heads, and these may have played a role in sound production or visual signaling. Hollow crests in certain species could perhaps have acted as resonating chambers, shaping calls that traveled across open land or through wooded areas. If that idea is correct, then the world of hadrosaurs may have been filled with distinctive voices, deep or resonant calls passed between members of a herd, between adults and young, or between rivals during breeding season. It is a beautiful thing to imagine, not a mute procession of prehistoric giants, but a society of large herbivores communicating through sound, movement, and group behavior beneath ancient skies. The possibility of herd living is especially compelling. Fossil sites containing many individuals of the same kind suggest that at least some dinosaurs lived or traveled together. Trackways showing multiple animals moving in the same direction strengthen this impression. Group living could have offered many advantages. It may have helped protect the young, improved vigilance against predators, and made movement across large landscapes more efficient. But social life also creates new demands. Animals and groups must communicate, compete, recognize one another, and sometimes cooperate. If hadrosaurs or ceratopsians lived this way, then their worlds were not only ecological systems, but social ones too, shaped by the constant presence of others of their own kind. This is where dinosaur life begins to feel especially real. The old stereotype of isolated monsters fades, replaced by scenes of ordinary existence repeated over generations. A herd approaching water in the early light, young animals staying close to adults, rival males facing one another with display structures raised, calls moving through the group as danger appears at the edge of the plain, a nesting colony becoming restless during a change in weather. These are not dramatic fantasies invented only for effect. They are reasonable reconstructions of the kinds of lives complex large animals often live, supported by fossil clues that keep pointing toward behavior richer than earlier generations expected. Even growth itself may have shaped dinosaur behavior in important ways. Many dinosaurs changed dramatically as they matured. A juvenile might have had different proportions, different ornamentation, and different vulnerabilities from an adult of the same species. In some cases, young dinosaurs may have occupied slightly different ecological niches, feeding differently or moving in different social groups until they reached adulthood. This would reduce competition within the species and allow a single kind of dinosaur to function almost like several different animals across its life stages. Nature often works in such subtle ways, and the fossil record is gradually revealing that dinosaurs were no exception. Predators would have been deeply affected by this layered world. A hunter looking at a herd does not see identical targets. It sees large adults, vulnerable young, healthy individuals, injured ones, alert animals at the edge, and distracted animals in the center. This means dinosaur predation was likely shaped by the same hard logic seen in modern ecosystems. A predator would often seek the easiest, safe opportunity, not the most dramatic one. That could mean targeting young animals, scavenging when possible, or avoiding prey that appeared too dangerous to tackle. Life in the dinosaur age, like life now, involved constant cost-benefit decisions made under pressure. There is something calming in realizing that this ancient world, for all its strangeness, followed patterns we still recognize. Dinosaurs did not live in endless scenes of chaos. Much of their existence would have been routine: feeding, traveling, resting, avoiding heat or seeking warmth, guarding young, watching for danger, competing during breeding seasons, recovering from injury, wading through bad weather. In this sense, their lives were not separate from the wider story of animal life. They were part of the same broad natural order that shapes birds, mammals, reptiles, and all other creatures today. And perhaps that is why their fossils speak so powerfully across time. A horn is not only a weapon, it is a clue to display, rivalry, or defense. A crest is not only a shape, it is a clue to sound or identity. A nest is not only a cluster of eggs, it is a clue to patience, timing, and care. A trackway is not only a mark in stone, it is a clue to movement, direction, and companionship. Bit by bit, all of these traces assemble a picture of a world that was once dismissed as crude, but now appears astonishingly detailed. The age of dinosaurs was not only an age of giants, it was an age of strategies. Some species survived through size, others through armor, others through speed, social behavior, specialized feeding, or reproductive success. The planet offered challenge after challenge, and dinosaurs responded with one solution after another. That is why their story lasted so long. They were not lucky for a moment. They were adaptable over deep time. As we continue deeper into their world, that becomes one of the most impressive facts of all. Dinosaurs were not remarkable only because they were enormous or because they vanished in a catastrophe. They were remarkable because they endured, diversified, and filled the earth with an extraordinary variety of forms and ways of life. They became grazers, browsers, hunters, scavengers, runners, diggers of nests, builders of lineages, defenders of young, and survivors of ancient change. Their world was complicated because life itself is complicated, and the more we uncover from stone and bone, the more that forgotten complexity returns. So when we picture dinosaurs now, it is worth imagining more than just thunderous footsteps and towering skeletons. It is worth imagining a horned face lifted toward a rival in the dusk, an armored back moving slowly through thick vegetation, a herd keeping together across wet ground, and low calls traveling between animals as evening settles over a Cretaceous plain. These quieter images may not always appear in old popular stories, but they bring us closer to the truth. Dinosaurs were not only spectacular, they were alive in all the ordinary and intricate ways that real animals always are. And so, after all the strange and beautiful details of the dinosaur world, what remains most impressive is not only their size, or their weapons, or even the mystery that still surrounds them. What remains most impressive is the sheer length and richness of their story. Dinosaurs were not a brief experiment. They were not a passing moment in the history of life. They lived on Earth for around 165 million years, a span so vast that it is difficult to truly feel it. Mountains rose and wore down, while dinosaurs continued to walk the land. Coastlines shifted, forests changed, new species appeared and vanished. Entire environments came and went. Through all of this, dinosaurs remained one of the dominant forms of animal life on land, adapting again and again to a restless planet. Human beings, by comparison, are astonishingly recent. All of recorded human history would vanish into a tiny fragment of the dinosaur timeline. Even our oldest civilizations, our oldest monuments, and our oldest stories are separated from the last non-avian dinosaurs by an abyss of time so large that the mind almost struggles to hold it. Yet fossils close that distance in a quiet way. A tooth, a footprint, a nest, a skeleton, even a single feather impression in stone can bring that lost age into focus. These remains remind us that the dinosaur world was not a myth. It was real. There really were mornings when herds crossed floodplains under unfamiliar trees. There really were nights when predators moved through shadow. There really were nesting grounds, hatchlings, storms, migrations, and long ages of survival beneath ancient skies. Perhaps that is why dinosaurs continue to hold such power over the imagination. They belong to a world far older and stranger than our own, but they were still animals, bound by the same basic needs that shape life now. They had to eat, move, reproduce, and endure. They had to survive injury, bad weather, competition, and fear. The young had to grow. The strong had to defend themselves. The weak had to find ways to live another day. In that sense, the dinosaur story is not only about difference, it is also about continuity. Across all the millions of years that separate us, they were still part of the same long, natural story that includes every living creature on Earth today. And in a very real way, dinosaurs are not fully gone. Every bird that lifts into the sky carries a fragment of that ancient world with it. The shape of a wing, the structure of a feather, the lightness of hollow bones, the instinct to brood eggs, the quick, alert movement of a small body balancing on two legs. All of these are reminders that extinction was not the end of everything. One branch endured. One branch crossed the boundary between worlds. The great non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, but their lineage did not vanish completely. It changed, narrowed, and survived. So when we hear birds in the morning, we are hearing the distant continuation of a story that began long before humans existed. There is something deeply calming in that idea. The earth does not keep life unchanged. It transforms it. The creatures of one age do not remain forever, but traces of them continue, carried forward into new forms. Dinosaurs ruled the land, then vanished, and yet still speak to us through fossils and feathers, through bone beds and bird song, through the patient work of science and the wonder it keeps alive. They remind us that the world has always been older, larger, and more complex than it first appears. The ground beneath our feet holds histories far deeper than memory. When paleontologists uncover a dinosaur fossil, they are doing more than digging up an object. They are reopening a lost chapter of reality. They study the shape of a bone, the wear of a tooth, the marks left by muscle, the chemistry preserved in stone. And from these details, they slowly rebuild an animal, an environment, and a way of life. It is careful work, often quiet work, and that too feels fitting. Dinosaurs are often imagined through noise and spectacle, but the truth of them has returned through patience. A jaw fragment here, a footprint there, a nesting site, a trackway crossing ancient mud, a feather halo around a small skeleton. Piece by piece, the old world has come back into view, and the picture that has emerged is more beautiful than the old myths. Dinosaurs were not just giant lizards in a swamp. They were feathered hunters, armored grazers, towering giants, social herd animals, nest builders, fast runners, patient browsers, vulnerable hatchlings, and survivors of deep time. Their world was not simple. It was layered with seasons, climates, sounds, displays, migrations, dangers, and routines. There were quiet mornings and violent encounters, long journeys and still moments, growth and death, competition and care. Like all real ecosystems, it was made of endless small realities beneath the famous dramatic ones. It is easy to focus only on the final catastrophe, the asteroid impact that ended the age of the great non-avian dinosaurs. And certainly, that event deserves its place as one of the most dramatic turning points in Earth's history. A single impact, followed by darkness, cold, and ecological collapse, brought an end to lineages that had lasted for tens of millions of years. But if we look only at the ending, we miss the true scale of what came before. Dinosaurs were not defined by extinction. They were defined by success. For an immense span of time, they flourished. They filled continents. They adapted to changing landscapes. They survived where others failed. Their extinction was sudden and tragic, but it came at the end of one of the greatest long-running triumphs in the history of life on land. That is why they deserve to be remembered not only as victims of disaster, but as masters of survival. They solved the problem of life on land in countless ways. Some became enormous beyond comparison. Some developed armor and clubs. Some evolved horns and frills. Some became agile, intelligent, feeling predators with keen senses. Some grew feathers that would one day help their descendants fly. In every direction, dinosaur evolution explored new possibilities. Their bodies became records of adaptation, each species carrying its own answer to the demands of the world around it. And maybe that is the deepest lesson hidden in their story. Life is not still. It is always experimenting, always adjusting, always finding new forms under the pressure of time. Dinosaurs lived long enough to show just how much can change while a great lineage continues. The world they began in was not the world they ended in. Continents moved, plants changed, climates shifted, rival species rose and disappeared. Yet dinosaurs continued, generation after generation, for longer than any human story can easily imagine. Their history teaches patience. It teaches scale. It reminds us that the Earth's story is written not in years, but in ages. So tonight, as we leave the dinosaur world behind, it is worth carrying one final image with us. Not only the image of a towering skeleton in a museum hall, or of a predator with open jaws, or of an asteroid blazing across the sky, but a quieter image, a broad plain in the fading light, a herd moving slowly toward water, small birds in the branches above, unknowingly carrying forward an ancient inheritance, the air warm, the land old, the rhythm of life continuing as it always had. In that moment, the age of dinosaurs does not feel like a nightmare or a fantasy. It feels like part of the long breathing history of the Earth, and that is perhaps why they are so comforting to learn about in this slow and peaceful way. Dinosaurs remind us that the world has been many things before it became the world we know. It has held giants, feathers, thunderous footsteps, nesting grounds, vanished forests, and entire kingdoms of life, now reduced to bone and stone. Yet nothing was truly wasted. The evidence remains. The story remains. And with each fossil uncovered, each new study, each careful reconstruction, that lost world becomes a little more visible again. So as the ancient landscapes fade into darkness, and the great herds and hunters pass once more into the distance, what stays behind is wonder. Not the sharp wonder of shock, but the calm wonder of perspective. Dinosaurs lived, changed, ruled, and vanished, and still the earth turned onward. Their time ended, but the larger story continued. Birds still rise into the sky. Life still adapts. The planet still carries its deep memory in stone beneath us. And somewhere within that memory, the dinosaurs remain, not only as creatures of the distant past, but as one of the grandest chapters the Earth has ever written.